All right, now White House has put out a social media post. It puts out some very interesting posts, and this is what the White House has said. And I quote here, this is literally what the White House is posting. If you have never been a panicant, then this pin's for you. The post has an image of Donald Trump with the caption, "Trust in Trump." This is what the White House is saying. Trust in Trump. If you've never been a panicant, this pin's for you. A very interesting and a very cryptic message by the White House on its social media page. Professor Kuznick, if I can bring you in on this, at a time when everything looks like it is up in the air, the White House has this cryptic image of Donald Trump on a shield with the American flag behind him and with the words "Trust in Trump" written on it. How many Americans at this moment trust in Trump?
Maybe 20% of Americans trust in Trump. He's even lost a big part of his MAGA base. He's lost some of the leading MAGA cheerleaders. The spokespeople for MAGA have turned against him. They say he's a hypocrite, that he lied to them, that he lied to the American people. But that image is interesting. I'm glad he didn't put out another image of himself as Jesus. He's just Trump today. He's not Jesus. So, but as the Pope says, you know, this is the worst kind of hubris, to think that you're a megalomaniac with this kind of unlimited power goes against. But Trump's been in a war of words with the Pope, with Guterres, with international leaders. You know, as Prime Minister Modi has been saying, this is not a time of war, but the United States doesn't get that message. And the United States thinks this is a time of war. But the American people don't want war. When this war started, the amount of support that Trump got was shockingly minimal, because usually when the United States goes to war, even if it's lied into a war, the American people rally around the flag, and the 70-80% approval and support. This time it was down below 40%, and now it might be below 30%. This is not a war the American people understand. It's not a war the American people want. And it looked like it was a war that Donald Trump was eager to get out of. So I just hope he's not decided to go the other direction, or that Israel is trying to force the United States again in the other direction.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned that this war is not popular with the Americans, but some interesting detail that is pointed out by a lot of commentators is that we've actually not seen any protests against this war as have happened in the past. When the Americans wanted to invade into Iraq, we saw these massive protest rallies where Americans came out and they said that they did not support the American invasion of Iraq back in 2003. But that has not happened this time round, even though the war has now been ongoing for 7 weeks. The talk more has been about the price of gasoline. The American commentators up here on news channels and talk of short-term pain for long-term gain. I mean, this is the kind of talk that we hear from some of these American commentators. Why do you think there haven't been many protest rallies where the Americans have come out on the street expressing their displeasure with the president for his war?
Well, 10 million Americans did show up for the No Kings rally a couple weeks ago, and that was an anti-war protest. It was a very, very big anti-war protest. But I know in the discussions with my students, 95% of my students are opposed to this war. And I talked to them about my generation and how we were out there protesting almost daily against the Vietnam War. And I asked them, why aren't they out there doing something similar, or organizing, or having teach-ins like we did? And they talk about a different kind of repression from the college administrations that began over Gaza, when the protesters who are opposing the Israeli genocide in Gaza were accused of anti-Semitism, when the college administrations cracked down on them. And then they have this thing where they're getting doxxed, where all of their personal information is being put out on the internet. And so they feel a different kind of personal threat than we did during Vietnam, or during Iraq even. So I think that's affecting it, but they're going to explode. The big moral issue for this generation has been what happened in Gaza. They saw that. They saw the rubble. They saw the killing with their very own eyes. And that was a big issue for them in the last election. Now they see this on top of it, and they're kind of appalled. The Americans are tired of having been lied into one war after another. But at least George W. Bush made an effort to lie them in, to convince them why we needed to invade Iraq in 2003. Donald Trump hasn't even made an effort, nor have any of the people around him. It's just after Venezuela, they thought they could throw their weight around and everybody else would just cave in. It didn't happen. And, in some ways, that's probably for the better because we don't know what Trump would have done. He said Cuba was next. He's threatening Greenland. He's threatening one country after another. So he found out that he can't be the dictator of the world the way he was hoping he could be.
Right, as you pointed out, that every generation has a different challenge and different circumstance in which they live and operate in. During the time of Vietnam, the position of the American governments had been much more open for people to come out and protest. But what has happened in the aftermath of the Gaza Strip and the Israeli attacks that they carried out on the people there? The protests in American universities were suppressed. Professor, this is a question that the Americans need to ask themselves. In your assessment, has the space for protest in America shrunk in the aftermath of what has unfolded in Gaza?
Yes, it definitely shrunk in the aftermath of what happened in Gaza, but it's going to expand again. If this war expands, I expect to see protests. Remember back in 1970, when the U.S. invaded Cambodia and the students were shot at Kent State and Jackson State, that was in early May of 1970, and the campuses exploded. The protests, the final exams were canceled all over. The ROTC buildings were burned down. There was a huge protest, even though it was the end of the semester like it is now. So I think that that's going to happen again. I think it'll happen again. I hope that it happens again, but it can't be my generation that's leading it. We're there. We're happy to do that, but it has to be the young generation. And they're very moralistic. I see with the older Americans that they grumble about the price of oil and the price of gas and the price of food and the price of health care. But we haven't heard the moral argument being made, that like happened in Vietnam or happened even more recently. This is an illegal and immoral war, a war of choice, a war that is outraged everybody's moral sensibilities. But so people are grumbling about the price of things. I can understand why that affects everybody, but I wish I could see more of the moral argument about the outrage that our country is doing this again. And I hear that from the students, but I don't hear it from a lot of older Americans.